Hello and welcome to another episode of the Breachside Broadcast, home of the finest voxcasting either side of the breach. On today's episode, we continue the story of Ashes of Malifaux. Things are coming to a head. A group of explorers, arcanists, and Oa have arrived in the necropolis to unearth an ancient machine built using tyrant technology. But will its power be enough to overcome the all-consuming might of the Burning Man? I hope you enjoy the penultimate installment of Ashes of Malifaux, right after this word from our sponsor.
This episode of the Breachside Broadcast is brought to you by Jeremiah Moriarty's Tombstones and Mort Safes. We specialise in resurrectionist-proof burial equipment. Our headstones are made from the finest marble and granite, and our mort safes are custom fabricated from wrought iron to enclose your loved one's coffin and keep it safe from the sticky fingers of resurrectionist scum. No more interfering with corpses or vanishing caskets. Comes with a lifetime guarantee, although that's already expired by the time you need it.
The necropolis smelled like old death and forgotten tragedy. Corridors twisted and turned in on themselves, following an unfathomable logic of design that boggled Tyrion's mind. It was a labyrinth of eldritch geometry, but that was nothing compared to the enigmas waiting within. The chamber that contained the infuriating machine had clearly been a cell at one point. The walls were notched with thousands upon thousands of hashes, and the remnants of iron bars studded the floor. The engine took up most of the center of the room, and the equipment needed to repair it crowded the walls, meaning that Tiri, Parson, and the members of the Explorer Society were working in cramped conditions. The edges of the room were fractured, offering numerous lanes of entrance and exit. Some of the gear was going into the side chambers, but most of it rose in higher and higher stacks along the periphery of the room. Between the Oa, McCabe, Jesse, and the handful of husks, there wasn't a lot of elbow room. The machine was complicated. Every time Tiri examined it, she felt as though she could nearly understand its purpose and design, that the final piece of the puzzle was tantalizingly close, scratching at the inside of her skull like a rat trying to escape a trap. Gretchen's schematics told only a fragment of the story, like pages ripped from the journal of a mad genius, shuffled together and then stitched into a tapestry of mechanical form and function. The design they described was a single note, struck loudly in the darkness. The engine itself was a dissonant orchestra, without a conductor, driving its audiences to madness. "I don't understand what's wrong," she said, stepping back and folding her arms. "Power is reaching the conduit, but it's not going anywhere. The manifold won't initiate. The capacitors are holding charge, but they don't seem to be connected to anything, the backup or the flow in any way. And that doesn't even get into the tangle of secondary structures." "The engine is not the enemy, child," Parson said from over her shoulder. The old forge master had spent the morning going between the schematics pinned to the wall and the engine, muttering to himself. "This is a Fey design, but does not follow Fey logic. Centuries, millennia's worth of knowledge died with our people, and even that would not be enough to understand the work of a tyrant. We struggle to understand because we think only how we would have built this. We must look beyond that." "How can we do that?" Tiri asked. "The tyrants were mad." "Yes, that's a good start," Parson answered, nodding to himself. "Madness." "Can't say I like the thought of that," McCabe muttered. "Been enough of that going around to last a lifetime, and then some." "Are you going to chat all day, or are you going to help me unload the rest of these boxes?" Jesse asked. They'd been able to get the wagon most of the way through the labyrinth, but the last 20 yards proved impossible, meaning they'd have to ruck the gear in by hand. Jessie's hands mostly, along with Nexus' many limbs. "I did my part, lugging all this up out of that old library. Figured you had 20 yards under control," McCabe said. "I'm accepting help from an ancient spider creature that possesses children," she said. "Asking you isn't that much lower." "Not just children," one of the husks commented. "Anything with a spark," the second husk said. "We are not particular." "Gracious, you've turned this place into a supply closet." The assembled explorers turned their attention to Gretchen and her small column of society members and hangers-on, including a flustered-looking Leviticus. Gretchen continued, "When you said you needed supplies from Katsura, I thought you meant a couple toolboxes." "We weren't sure what we'd be facing given the incomplete nature of the schematics, as well as the origin of the device," Tiri said. "I'd rather be prepared. Did you bring the final pieces?" "Your machines are unloading them now," Gretchen said, as she reviewed Tiri's progress with the machine. "Did you have any trouble on your excursion?" "No, everything went fine," Tiri confirmed. She watched one of the Owen constructs carry over a small crate, setting it down gently in front of her. Parson set to work opening the lid, carefully lifting out the contents. It was a flat, black disc, so dark that the flickering light of the lantern seemed to sink into its depths. Spiraling runes marked one side of the disc, while the other was covered in thin, sharp grooves. Parson handled it carefully and at arm's length. "How did you come by this?" Parson asked, his voice reverent. "Prophecies have a way of working things out," Gretchen answered. "Everything else has already fallen into place. Speaking of which," she fished in her pocket and produced a large orb. "I'm not sure of its place in the operation, but I trust you'll figure it out." "This is part of the machine as well. What possible use could—" Parson took the sphere to examine it, then gave Gretchen a knowing, almost suspicious look. "You have the most curious collection, Miss Janus." "Useful things and useful people," she said, clapping her hands together. "I will trust your expertise, Parson. Let's get this machine up and running. We don't have all day." Hours later, the Oa stepped back to admire their work. "I think we're ready." Tiri stood over the machine, her hands hovering over the manifold. Something still made Tiri uncomfortable. The machine appeared complete, yet parts of its function still remained a mystery. But she'd come this far. There was no going back. "Are you sure?" Gretchen asked. "I've waited for my whole life to do this. There will be no second chance." "The drive wheels are aligned. The artifact was surprisingly easy to integrate, and the mechanism is powered up seemingly on its own," Tiri said. "I think it may well activate without us, if it had a proper source of energy." "That's not concerning at all," McCabe muttered. The old scavenger stood with his arms folded, back to the wall, eyes darting over the engine. Ancient engine buried in the ground with a mind of its own. Hardly reassuring. "I did not mark you as the kind of man to balk at the very cusp of greatness, Lucas," Gretchen said dismissively. "Very well. Places, everyone." "If it's all the same to you, I'm going to wait outside," Jessie said. "No need for all of us to die in the resulting inevitable explosion. Lucas?" "I'm going to stick around," McCabe said. "A lot of my work in this thing. Figure I should see it through. Your funeral." Jessie and the husks gathered their tools and exited, leaving only a single servant with black eyes behind. "Anyone else losing their nerve?" Gretchen asked. When no one else budged, she nodded to Tiri. "Very well. Proceed." A hush settled over the tightly packed onlookers as the big Oa leaned over the machine and touched a series of mechanisms. A deep thrumming sound filled the chamber, and the cogs and pistons began to cycle along the spine of the engine. The walls of the former cell began to vibrate, and a steady avalanche of dust and debris shook loose from overhead. Tiri craned her neck at the ceiling. Gretchen motioned Leviticus over. "We'll need you here. Like I said, without a tyrant, fate is the next best thing." "That won't be necessary." Damien Ravencroft stepped from a narrow opening in the far corner of the chamber. Light coursed down the length of his arm, like sparks drawn from struck flint. Against her wishes, I've decided to see this miraculous engine for myself. I'm surprised to see you here, Mr. Ravencroft. Does that mean you're here to assist in fulfilling this prophecy? Gretchen drew her derringer from her pocket, keeping it ready at her side. Damien shrugged. Perhaps. I haven't decided quite yet. I have to admit, walking into a room full of hostiles ain't the brightest scheme I've heard of, McCabe said. Hell of a way to get yourself killed. Truthfully, it didn't seem Damien was in any immediate danger. Other than Gretchen, the rest of the expedition had done little to threaten him. The Agassiz were paused mid-motion in their work on the great machine. Surrounding them, the Oa looked more curious at this sudden interruption than alarmed. The Iron Matron especially seemed nonplussed by Damien's intrusion. Lucas and the remaining husks stood just inside the main door to the chamber. Only Levaticus, lingering close to an array of vials along the periphery of the engine, seemed interested. The old man fidgeted with one of the siphons on his wrist as Damien swept closer, giving the engine a cursory examination before addressing Gretchen directly. What promises have you made, Gretchen? What lies have you told to convince these people to lend their aid to this project? No lies, Ravencroft. Only speculation. Gretchen raised the pistol, but it seemed an almost perfunctory gesture. I made no promises. Everyone here is getting something out of this, including you. Don't tell me you're here on purely inquisitive grounds. That's true, Damien admitted. I'm afraid Witness and I are at something of an impasse. She believes this device should be used. I disagree. She craves order. I want to unravel the mysteries of everything. The Burning Man is part of that. I may not fully understand the device, but it will cut the Burning Man off at the knees. Your friends seem to agree with me, Gretchen said, interposing herself between Damien and the thrumming machinery of the engine. I am willing to risk a great deal to accomplish that goal. Damien laughed mirthlessly. That's precisely my concern, Miss Janus. You blindly trust them and take their word as fact. This engine is tyrant built. You don't know what the device does, but you blindly trust Obliteration's intentions. Tyrant? Maxine cocked her head in Gretchen's direction. Is that true? Gretchen's veneer of confidence faded at the mention of Obliteration. The gathered Oa paled and began whispering to themselves. All the more reason to trust this engine, Gretchen said, quickly recovering. His experience came from manipulating time and reality, exactly what the Burning Man is capable of doing. Perhaps he even saw this happening and crafted this as a failsafe. Damien thought over Gretchen's point. Yes, I suppose. But there are always risks tampering with the buried secrets of the tyrants. You're asking your compatriots to take the same risk without the full details of the gamble. I am, Gretchen replied confidently. I spent years researching and gathering the necessary parts. The Oa have plumbed the depths of the engine. Do you think I'd honestly work on something I thought would bring about my own destruction? That resonated in Damien, a fellow researcher questing for knowledge, ever insatiable. His scars tingled, as did the runes carved into his bones. Just as he'd risked his life to escape the Yellow Crypt, so too was Gretchen Janus invested in seeing this project through to its end. Well, Damien acquiesced, reaching into his cloak. If you're going to truly have this engine perform what it was meant to do, you'll need this. He presented a pocket watch, its crystalline face broken. The chain glittered in the dull light, as did the inscription on the back. H. Kitchener. Where did you get that? Gretchen asked, taken aback. Damien smirked. A friend of Obliteration's. Seems he knows when someone is tampering with his toys. The man walked closer to the Oa and presented it to them. The final piece, he proclaimed. Parson looked at Tiri, who nodded. The Forge Master picked up the watch, almost tiny in his hand, and cinders flared across his palm. Jerufe's mark, he confirmed. Tiri was already scouring the engine for an appropriate place, and there it was, a circular gap in the very center. It seemed ludicrous that such an ancient and complicated device would have a coupling for a human-made pocket watch, but there was no denying the compatibility of the piece. Before anyone could object, Parson slotted the former Governor-General's timepiece easily into the heart of the engine. No, Maxine shouted too late, after realizing what Parson had done. Concentric rings in the machine began to turn slowly, as the watch connected parts of the machine linked only through the burning man's impossible influence over reality. Maxine felt the pressure in her head growing, cracking her fragile mindscape. She knew what that meant, and what was coming. I apologize, I didn't realize. Parson tried to confusedly placate, but stopped when Maxine gave him a strained smile. Believe me, we all make mistakes. Maxine twirled her finger over her head. Pack it up, folks. I'm getting out of here before... I hate to interrupt, Tiri said. She was peering down at the pulsing heart of the machine. But I think we're out of time. Blue light flared at the end of the long underground hallway. It was no larger than a flame on a candle, but its heat filled the chamber. The storm inside Maxine's skull rose with the machine's pitch. The susurrating whisper of the stars, so long in remission, was now burning a hole through her thoughts. She stood frozen and helpless in the middle of the chaos, and started laughing. He's here, she whispered excitedly. He's here. Panic erupted around the engine. The Oa were talking at increasingly frantic speed, slipping into some ancient dialect of piercing tones and low hums, mixing with the shuddering whir of the machine at the center of the room. Orville had fallen to the desperate task of tending to his wife, who was walking towards the encroaching blue flame. The husk stood in the corner, watching silently. Only Levitica seemed unperturbed by the rapidly developing cacophony at the heart of the cell. The old man stood near an array of vials, watching the action with bemused disinterest. "Protect the engine," Gretchen cried. As one, the Owen construct stepped forward, their living kin standing between. They blocked Orville, who looked on helplessly as Maxine began whispering, each step taking her off the ground as though she walked on steps invisible to the sane eye. McCabe swore, drawing his pistol and whip. If he survived this and the engine didn't, the Thunders would make sure he paid for failure. Damien stayed between, a bystander undecided. Whatever this engine can do, we need to do it now. Parson re-examined the conduits, taking note of the new channels that formed with the newly added pocket watch. He cast a nervous eye behind him. The watch in the engine center called. Why he answered, the burning man didn't know. But deep inside his impossibly grafted mind, both human and tyrant, a spark of recognition formed. Familiarity. The willpower to focus madness, his madness, into action. The burning man walked at a painfully slow pace, something it hadn't done forever. Arcs of coruscating blue flame burst from his form, burrowing into the necropolis walls like overgrown worms. Each time one melded with the stone, reality changed. The tunnel grew freezing cold and unbearably hot. Stone dripped like wax, bubbled, dissolved, hardened, and went unchanged all in the same moment. The burning man raised his arms, almost gently, then called. Heat and madness washed over the assembled in a wave. Tendrils continued striking the chamber like lightning, pumping magic into the breaches forming at their ends. One struck Maxine and lifted her, setting the woman's mind ablaze. She saw every possibility, every outcome in multicolored fire. All resistance vanished in proximity to the burning man. She was his servant, as she was meant to be. Maxine consulted the Society's embryonic plan in her head and focused the magic coursing through her. Squirming masses of flesh and cancerous magic started falling from breaches cast throughout the tunnel, strategically placed by Maxine's genius. She frowned when a portal placed near the engine fizzled and popped. Maxine tried again. The breach closed and vanished, energy drawn in and dissipated by the weird machinery. A ripple of discordant sound, blending beautiful music and the ravings of a lunatic, echoed through the cavern. In the depths of Maxine's psyche, her sanity cried out in happiness. They still had a chance. Without a sound, the Owen constructs walked forward. Ket, Danoke, and Tiri's remaining honor guard adopted a circular stance, advanced weapons pointing in every direction. They moved as one, rising and falling into the breachlings in perfect sync. To their right, McCabe snarled, trying to ignore his unease as a few of Gretchen's Nexus servants protected him with knives and impromptu weapons. Orville started towards Maxine, but felt a metallic hand on his shoulder. Tiri looked down at him mournfully. "Don't throw away your life. The engine is the only thing that can help her now." The mustached aviator blinked away tears, but nodded. He scurried to the machinery, where Parson and Gretchen were arguing. "We need to increase the power supply. The prophecy states the engine wasn't meant to run on just its own," Gretchen insisted. "We're well past that point," Tiri said. "Whatever process has begun, I think we need to let it complete. Stopping it now could be catastrophic." Parson wiped his crest. "I agree, it's still cycling. We should wait for it to reach a stable level before adding anything else. We don't want to overload it." Around them, the machine's self-created shield moaned as it fended off the Burning Man's assault. Obliteration's work simply negated most of the strikes and portals being thrown at it, but it couldn't account for the improbabilities of every possibility in a vacuum of chaos. Beyond the shield, it was clearly evident the defenders were fighting a losing battle. One of the old constructs lay in melted ruin, while the other grappled with multiple fleshy arms and mouths binding it in place. The living Oa were badly injured. Two lay motionless, while the others bore cauterized wounds and bled from numerous others. McCabe was almost alone. The Nexus hosts were charred shells, their mites overloaded and burned out by the pulses of magic they were forced to absorb. Damien felt the voice in his head, and agreed with what she said. "We've drawn the Burning Man's attention. I can buy you a few moments to deliberate, but figure out what you're doing. Quickly." Damien turned to Gretchen. "If you have other assets to call on, Miss Janus, now would be the time." He finished curtly before stepping outside the barrier of the shield. Damien grounded his sword. The brands burned into his flesh began to glow, pulsing in time with the thrumming engine. He let himself fall into the serenity of Witness' embrace, filling his unquenchable soul with her magic. Pale energy surrounded his hands and emanated from him in a glow. Wherever it touched, order followed. Breachlings that got too close simply vaporized, giving Damien time to close the ulcerous portals. Sweat beaded on his brow immediately. Facing the Burning Man's cultists and their magic was nothing compared to this. The form of Maxine Agassiz broke her assault on the engine, giving Damien her full attention. She gestured, and the Burning Man's tendrils writhed. Pressure hit in waves, pressing in on all sides. Without Witness, Damien knew his sanity would have shattered in a matter of seconds. Each step the Burning Man took towards the machine reduced the probability of pushing him back. Damien felt the percentages slipping down, 1/10, 1,000th, so low nobody but a madman would dare bet against the odds. He called on Witness again. The tyrant acquiesced, and her magic flowed, but even the might of Order Incarnate could barely keep the portals at bay. As the distance between Maxine and the Burning Man closed, the chamber's heat grew unbearable. McCabe stumbled behind the protective barrier, skin red and blistered. Ket, Danoke, and the few surviving warriors followed, smoke pouring from their cursed wounds. Tiri watched her brother fall to the floor and tried not to panic. The remains of the two Owen constructs already melted to slag. There was no hope of recovering their precious cartouches. Another piece of the dying Oa chipped away. She turned to Gretchen, pointing at Damien. "We need his magic to bring the machine above its threshold." Tiri cast a quick look at Leviticus, nestled away in the furthest corner of the necropolis chamber. "Or him if you think he can do it." The prophecy was clear. If we can have her, Witness must be the one to power Obliteration's engine, Gretchen snapped in frustration. Damien's magic barricaded the tunnel, but he couldn't fend off both Maxine's assault and the Burning Man's advance. The effort was killing him. "Ravencroft!" she shouted, trying to get the mage's attention. When I tell you, get in here and give the engine everything you've got. Damien could only turn his head a fraction of an inch in response. Sweat poured from his face. We'll have seconds at most. Is that enough time? He didn't hear Gretchen's response. I hope it will be. She pulled a small soulstone from her pocket. It was a dark purple, almost black, shining with the energy locked within. Gretchen spoke into its murky core and prayed.
That's it for another episode of the Breachside Broadcast. Join us next time for the thrilling conclusion of Ashes of Malifaux.